everybody's doing leak code. It's a shame. I want your audience to ask themselves, like, what are they trying to do? Are they just trying to get a job? And that's fine. Or are you trying to build a career, like put a dent in the world? Leak code is not going to be enough. Anytime someone says NFTs are going to change everything with the metaverse and Web3 and DeFi, ask them exactly what that means.
Welcome back to another episode of the Open Source Cafe, and I'm super excited for this one because we have some of the brightest minds here with us. We have Ron, who is the CEO at Showcase, and we have John, who is a staff engineer at Credit Karma, and he has previously worked at Apple and Amazon and 10x. So, without further ado, first of all, thanks a lot for joining. Really appreciate it. John, would you like to tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Where to start? So currently, I'm a senior staff software engineer. Don't demote me. I worked very hard to get here. That's a joke. I've been in Silicon Valley for 27 years. This is the 27th year of my career. I started my career at Apple right out of university. I went to the University of San Francisco. That'll come up in a second. And then from Apple, I've jumped all around the valley working for lots of companies, big and small. So companies from Amazon as a consultant, Yahoo, and Credit Karma, where I work now acquired by Intuit, and something like 20 startups. And especially if you count Showcase, I've lost count. And in the startup game, I've kind of been every character in the Game of Thrones. So I'm not a Jason Calacanis, but I've been employee number one, employee number two, founder, co-founder, partner. I've been on the board. I've been a CEO and or employee number 500 at Credit Karma. So I've kind of been around. I've seen a lot of stuff. Few things I've gotten really good at. Teaching. So I really enjoy teaching. I'm an adjunct professor at University of San Francisco, where I met Rong, and we birthed Showcase. I think I'm also pretty good at architecture, big systems, but also spent a lot of time on the front end as well. So I'm a JavaScript specialist, now TypeScript. And lately at Credit Karma, because we're growing very quickly, I've had to get really good at interviewing. I actually perform hundreds of interviews a year. And I also work on the promotion process. So modifying how we hire and how we promote. So I've got the whole life cycle of the software developer kind of in my career. And the primary course I teach at USF is on software engineering career. So it's basically like leak code, interviewing, soft skills, portfolios, resumes, stuff like that, which is a really good,
compensation
yeah,
negotiation.
that's right. Yeah. Compensation, negotiation, components of compensation, equity. If you're going to join a startup, how much should you ask for? You'd be surprised at how many people who know how to negotiate in other parts of their life do not know how or have the chutzpah to ask for more when presented an offer. So yeah, my mission is basically to help everybody join this life-changing profession that I've had the pleasure and luck to get into for the last 27 years.
Shane, John, it's really excited to speak more about that, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Before that, Ron, I know you've been on the channel as well, but still, would you like to give a brief introduction?
Yeah, I'll keep it short. So I'm Ron. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Showcase, which is a professional network for developers or coders or anybody like data scientists even to connect, to build or find communities, and ultimately get access to these future of work job opportunities. So we've been in the market for about 18 months. We've raised a bunch of rounds for funds and raised money from nice, really, really good investors. And yeah, so the journey of Showcase really started with John, which is why I really wanted him to come in and join the call today. I was about to break into the tech scene in Silicon Valley in San Francisco, and I asked John, there has to be a better way that we can represent who we are as developers, right? Really showcase all of our work, our portfolio, our skills, our knowledge, who we've worked with. And so that's how John and I first, discussed about Showcase. And it's been an incredible journey so far. And John has been a great mentor throughout this whole process.
It's been, I'll just say it's been incredible to watch Wrong take this idea, which was born, I think, partially during class, where we're talking on the subject of why resumes are propaganda and why LinkedIn is terrible and portfolios are hard. And he's grown this idea with teams and fundraising and just pure hustle into something that's quite remarkable. So it's been great to be a part of it.
Yeah, most definitely. I could not agree more. Like, I stopped using LinkedIn because, like, you cannot really customize your feed over there. Like, it's all mix and you get a lot of spam. Twitter is better, I would say, like, than LinkedIn, but still it isn't only developer focused. So by the way, everyone else who is watching, check out showcase.com. You can use the code join Kunal to get started. Let's talk a little bit more about the topic in hand, which is like how developers will power the world. And given your experience with helping folks break into the tech industry, maybe you can share some thoughts around how to get a job, basically. So before we move on to that, can you tell us a little bit more about your story? Like, how did you break into the tech scene? Because you mentioned like you've been programming for more than close to 20 years or something. So how did you get started?
More than 30 years. So you're off by 50%. Yeah. So I when I was younger, my parents got a computer and I just kind of wrote BASIC on it. Back then, if you can believe it, there used to be these books for children which included entire source code in the book, and you would have to take the book and type the source code in by hand in order to read how the story ends. So that's kind of how things began for me. And then I took a class in high school. My teacher said I had an aptitude. What did he know? But then when I went to university, I studied art. And I went to art school first, and my grandmother, a very practical woman, she said, "What are you doing? Hey, what are you going to do with art? Are you going to be one of those starving artists? There's no money in art." I said, "Okay, fine." So I changed my major to English, and my grandma called me back, and she said, "Writers are poorer than artists." So then I changed it to be a Japanese major, and she said, "I don't even know what that is." And then finally, I chose computer science. And she said, "I think that's the right choice." And she was 100% right. Very smart woman. And so I kind of got into it by accident. And the thing that I wasn't the best computer scientist. And in fact, in the beginning, I didn't really know anything. I didn't know basic stuff that everyone else around me seemed to know, like what is recursion? What is a stack? The boot up process of an Apple computer, which was my interview question at Apple. I didn't know any of these things. But the thing that separated me was I had that other separate experience. I wasn't just a computer scientist. I brought this other stuff to the table, namely the ability to communicate, the ability to think visually. And because I did all kinds of other extracurricular activities at USF, like acting and comedy, I was comfortable in front of an audience. So that really set me apart. Even though my technical skills in the beginning weren't that great, what set me apart was I could talk, I could be heard from the back of the room, I could present ideas, even complex ideas, to people who didn't have time to get into the details. And that just set me on my way. Now I've had to fill in the gaps. I do know what recursion is now, thank you very much. But it right from the gate, I knew there was not one path into this industry, and that there were all kinds of arbitrages you can bring with whatever particular skills you have.
Yeah, could not agree more. That's what I tell like folks as well. Like, try out various things and see what you like. We'll talk more about that later, but I believe Ron was saying something.
No, I just wanted to build on what John said, right? Which is his grandmother said that that's definitely the right choice, computer science, and that's one of the reasons why we're building Showcase in the first place, right? We believe in that developers are so important to every business, every idea, every company. And for instance, the reason I became a computer scientist and I went to USF to do a master's in computer science, where I met John, is because I came from the finance world, from the investment world, right? That's my background. And then from that journey, I kind of realized that technology is penetrating every single industry. Software is inevitable and is ubiquitous today. And so the people who write software are developers. And so if you have the skill to write code, to build applications, to build systems, you are very, very valuable going forward over the next 10, 15 years. And just wanted to just magnify what John was saying.
Yeah, no, totally agree with that. And since a lot of new folks who are just getting started in their career will be joining, um, when we talk about the learning experience, how has it changed now over the years, according to you, John? If someone wants to be a developer like today, the process than it was like 30 years ago, for example.
Oh, yeah, it could not be more different. It is like going from black and white to color. In fact, that probably literally happened. I remember when I was in university, we were doing a project with Oracle database, and we had some problem. This was before the web. It was before Stack Overflow, obviously. So we had to look up the answer in a book. And this is a book for a proprietary piece of software. So we had to chase down one of our classmates who had the book physically, but he wasn't here. I think it was near Christmas vacation. He was back in Europe. So we had to call Europe. We had to call Spain and find him and ask him to look up this particular syntax in the book, because there was really no other way to get it. You just ask around. It was very social, but it was hard to learn. The secrets were hidden. And in the last, with the advent of the web, and then now the ubiquity of self-published video, and then tools now like Replit and Glitch and even HackerRank and LeetCode, there is an infinite amount, and like an infinite beautiful curricula floating around the web, and you can come in at different angles and get just a PhD's worth of knowledge in literally any direction. And there are some creators and some educators who do an amazing job of bringing you on a particular journey. I'll give you an example. My favorite YouTube channel is run by a gentleman named Dan Schiffman, who is a professor at, I think, NYU. I really hope I got that right. He wrote a book called The Nature of Code. And so his angle into learning how to code is very visual, it's art-based, and it's also deals with the mimicry of nature. So if you watch his YouTube channel, it's very entertaining, and he goes into all kinds of topics really slowly. And I learned everything I know about neural networks, or let's say the beginnings of what I know about neural networks, all from him. And it was the most entertaining thing and super gentle. So like I'd like to think that if I was studying computer science now, I would have been a lot better and a lot more entertained along the way than I was in the early 90s.
Yeah, and thanks a lot for sharing that. And one more thing I want to ask you, is when we're talking about like years and years of experience, most of the time I get this question like, hey, does it really make sense to learn this technology right now, or will it be like obsolete in the next 5 years?
Ooh.
But you've been programming for like 30 years or so. So
Yeah.
To be a good developer, like obviously constantly learning new things, how has that been your experience like? Because you might have seen so many technologies come and go. So how do you keep up?
Kunal, this is a great question. And the way I phrase it to the students is, because I've done a lot of thinking on this, and let's say, okay, let's back up for a second. My first language was BASIC out of the book that I typed into the computer. And then when I came to university, the first language they taught us in was Pascal, which is a beautiful language that no one uses anymore. And then we had to use a similar language for Mathematica, that was in the mathematics department. And then we started learning C++, and then Java, but Java was very early, and it was like the I remember we had two back then. Authors would send us preprint books so the students could go through the book, find errors. And I remember we had Bjorn Straustrup's C++ book, like the Bible for C++. We had a preprint, and we were working against that. And the same thing for one of those early Java books. So like I was there at the beginning of Java being taught in schools, and it's amazing it's still around. So Java's probably the one constant. But since then, I have worked in ActionScript, JavaScript, Golang, Rust, Objective-C, Perl, did a lot, decade or so in Perl, HTML, CS. I mean, just like the stack of technologies, it never gets smaller because things tend to fracture, right? JavaScript's not enough. Let's make CoffeeScript. And now I'm an expert in CoffeeScript. And then that kind of died out. And then, now it's TypeScript, right? There's this, just like human languages, programming languages tend to diverge because no one technology or language is good enough to solve all the problems. I mean, that comes with being Turing complete. So one of the things I tell my students is that you have to develop an intuition for what's a fad and what's a forever technology. And after you learn a few of these things, you start to realize what part of this is forever and what part is just like just right now. So one of the examples that I called it really well, and I'm proud of this call. I don't get every call right, but Ruby on Rails. Now there's a lot of people who might be angry when I say that Ruby on Rails was a fad. You can still build a lot of stuff really quickly with Ruby on Rails, and there's nothing wrong with it. Ruby is a beautiful programming language. But if your project has to deal with any kind of scale, at least this is my snapshot of knowledge from a decade or so ago, the Rails has a problem. Any ORM is going to have a problem with under load or under big load. So Rails, when Ruby on Rails came around, I had to make a decision. Do I spend my time learning this, working in it, even though it's lucrative, or do I wait it out? And so I had to choose at the time between heavy duty JavaScript and Ruby on Rails. And I chose JavaScript because Ruby felt a little like a fad. And I think that's despite the success of 37 Signals and Basecamp and all that, I do believe that it's mostly gone from like heavy duty environments like the environments I operate in. So yeah, you will never stop learning. There's always new stuff. Most of it is not brand new. It's just a repackaging. So look for the things that are going to be forever. Like, for example, closures. When Lambda and closures were packaged in the way they are in JavaScript and they came along, that is a forever idea. So if you don't learn JavaScript, or if you learn it and then you forget it later, that's okay, because you're carrying this idea of pure Lambda around, and you'll see it again. Learning new syntax is the easy part.
Yeah, if you learn one language, jumping onto another one, that's not going to be much difficult.
Well, it depends on the language. If you learn Python first and you want to go to Lisp, that's going to be harder. Or if you learn Python and then you want to jump to Rust, that's going to be harder. But in the categories or in a swim lane, all of those languages are going to be quite similar. There are differences, but like it's best not to get caught up in the details so much. Over time, you want to look at the bigger picture, and then it is like you said, the languages are all quite similar.
And is there also like, what are your thoughts on like whenever some new tech comes out, it actually creates new job opportunities as well? So Kubernetes, for example, you mentioned you've been working with architecture, for years.
Sure,
so it was only open sourced by Google in 2014. It's a relatively new tech, but now it's taken like a boom. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't know that Kubernetes itself created new jobs. I think it's certainly solving problems. I mean, ideally, a technology would eliminate jobs because it makes things easier. Now, and I don't think I've seen that in the world. I think usually when you add a new technology and you bolt it onto all these other ones, now you need more people to kind of watch it. But in the beginning, the kind of DevOps world, and that's a relatively new phrase, you had to have people to run scripts to to like spin up a VM or even install it on a hardware box, and then like FTP your files over there or insert a disk, and then set them somewhere, change permissions, execute them, monitor them to see that they're running. Oh, now there's more scale. Now bring out another physical box. All those jobs are gone, right? We don't need that many people to do that because Kubernetes will just, in theory, auto scale and do all this magic. Now, if you use a lot of magic, you get rid of the manual labor, but now you need more magicians. So I don't think that the amount of work has gone down, even with the addition of Kubernetes, but the nature of the work has gone from shoveling coal to casting spells. And so there's always new tech. Like Kubernetes
love that
someday will be,
analogy.
that's everything changes all the time. The only constant is JavaScript.
And learning. All right, Rong, I would love to hear from you about your experience working at a startup and versus like a big tech company, especially in today's times when most big companies have also gone fully remote like forever. So what are your thoughts about that?
So the only big companies that I've worked at are not big tech companies. They were like banks. So because I was an analyst and I used to work as an equity analyst on both the buy side and sell side. So my experience in the tech world has only been in startups or small companies. So I think you should put it over to John, and John can tell you the difference between working at a startup versus a big tech company.
Yeah, John, take it away.
Just let me know if I'm going on too long. I don't want to dominate the conversation. I have a lot of thoughts. How many hours do we have? There's a lot of differences when you're coding. Let's just stick to just coding at a big company and a small company. So let's take, for example, Credit Karma or even auction.com, where the company I worked at previously, which was a similar unicorn startup, but it was 20 years old. Credit Karma is 15 years old this year, I think. Auction.com, I think, was 20 years old when we were acquired. And over 20 years, you build up a lot of technical debt. That's just code for a bunch of old code. And we don't know how it works. And all the people who wrote it are dead, and their grandchildren worked on it, and now they're gone. And like there's a lot of stuff over time that builds up, and you get this kind of inertia. So if I hire you, Kunal, at a startup, and I say, like, build me an app, you are starting from scratch. It is what we call a green field. Do whatever you want. Download the latest thing, build it, no code, low code, whatever you want, and it'll work. But if I hire you at Microsoft and I say, build us an app, hold on a second, slow down, hold up, son, hold up. What are you trying to do? You're going to have conversations with every single person in your division to try and figure out if it's okay for you to build that app. Are you putting it in an existing app? Is that app in Kotlin or Java or Objective-C or Swift? What are you going to do about security? Where are you going to store the user's data? Is it going to be secure? Is it going to be encrypted at rest? Is it going to be erasable if you're in the GDPR, if someone says, I want to be forgotten? There's so many considerations when you're at a large company, primarily around data and tech debt, than there are at a startup, where it's just like, woohoo, it's this cowboy coding, do whatever you want. Now, when you're working at a startup, you can wear lots of different hats. You will be the designer because there's no designer yet. You get to learn a little bit about CSS. You'll do the front end. Maybe you'll do the back end. Maybe you'll create a microservice. None of those things are going to be great out of the gate if you're just out of school, but you're going to learn a ton. But you're going to learn fast at a startup, but there's going to be a ceiling. You're going to learn slower at a big company, maybe, but there's so much knowledge there that's where I think a lot of the true growth happens. But there are trade-offs. At a large company, it feels slower, but the pay is better. And at a startup, it feels faster because it is faster, and the pay sometimes can be nothing in the beginning, depending on how you're structured. So those are two of the big differences.
John, I was thinking maybe you want to tap into how newer startups or newer companies, they architect around microservices, and so they can prolong the longevity of this agile, quick, or adopt the latest technologies method that a startup would do, and move away from this legacy uh, infrastructure. I don't know if you want to touch on that, which is
Yeah, I mean,
very fresh to these days, right?
yeah, this is okay. I gotta organize my thoughts. This is very important here. You should never prematurely optimize, which you and I have talked about quite a bit. If you assume that you're going to have billions of users, you're going to build the wrong thing. It's going to be because you're optimizing for scale. It's going to be slower. There are going to be more moving parts. You're not going to be able to run as fast. So, and I think some of the choices we made early in Showcase were, let's just build this in the simplest way to reason about. And I think that served us. But if you remember, at some point, we got enough traction that we had to kind of rethink how things were architected. So I believe that the best life cycle of a startup, and there's no one way to do it, but the best life cycle is you start off building something that's basically a prototype. It should probably be a monolith. It should probably not be microservices, because that's harder to manage, and you should only do that if you have a large enough team. So build a monolith. It's going to get gross. It's not going to be perfect. Every engineer's instinct is, I got to make it perfect. And that's the wrong instinct, because most of the stuff you build in the beginning, you're going to throw away. How many versions of Showcase did we iterate through before we landed on the stuff that we have now? There are so many ideas. Just
Probably 30. Probably
yeah.
30.
And if we had invested in like a full architecture, complete ready for acquisition by Google on day one, we never would have gotten to iteration number 2 or 3 or 4, let alone 30. You have to be nimble in the beginning, and then as you grow, it's going to get technical debt. You're going to kind of blow up like the Hulk. And even though the Hulk can jump around, when a company gets like big, it's not going to be as nimble. So later, you're going to have to do surgery on this monolith. You're going to have to take out pieces of functionality and throw them away, or take them out and launch them as a microservice and like modernize that part. This is natural and normal. In fact, if you have technical debt, if you have a monolith that now you've grown out of, that is like breaking out of the egg. That is a normal part of the life cycle. And that's a successful startup problem. If you're at a company and they have like this crazy technical debt, that's because they succeeded. There's a lot of companies that are dead with beautiful technology written perfectly and got no users. I'll get off my soapbox now. Thank you. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Thanks for sharing. I really loved your examples. And one thing I want to ask is also from the hiring point of view. If someone is planning to apply to a startup versus a big tech company, how different are like the hiring procedures and like requirements? Obviously, depends on company to company, but still.
Yeah. Okay, now I've got you right where I want you. Here's the secret about hiring that is not obvious when you're just starting out, and that is this process is completely random. There is no company on earth that truly knows how to hire. We all have this legacy idea of, oh, let's get some people in a room and ask them some brain teasers, or how do we test for software engineering skills? I don't know. Let's just go through like a brain teasers, little toy problems, reverse a linked list, and O of N time. Like these are random attempts to find some way to test whether or not someone is going to be successful at your company. Now, we put a lot of thought at Credit Karma into making this great, and I believe that we're close. We've done so much to make it fair and repeatable, and to make it a good, accurate measurement of skills. But there's no company on earth that knows what they're doing when they're hiring. None. I will take anyone to the mat on this. The process can be really, like at a big company, the process is kind of like a machine, right? They have a bank of questions they're going to ask you. And if they've done it right, they'll have a standard way of judging you on those questions. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes you show up to Microsoft or some other company and a random person comes in. They just heard about this interview 5 minutes before. They haven't read your resume, which may or may not be a good thing. They have a favorite question that they've been asked, and they know that question really well. They ask you. They've not been trained to ask questions. So they're going to throw this question at you. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's a fair question. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's a question that's indicative of how you're going to do on the job. Maybe it's not. It's random. And this is what makes me so upset. And this is why I've dedicated this part of my career to helping other people get past this process. It's just a fickle, random, whimsical, like almost like a hazing process. I mean, think about other industries, like being a lawyer in the United States or being a doctor in the United States. You've probably seen or heard about it. Maybe it's the same in other countries. Being a doctor is memorize every bone in the human body and all of chemistry and all of physical chemistry, and then don't sleep for 6 or 7 years. And then okay, cool, now you're a doctor. Pass this impossible test. I don't know, lack of sleep is a problem here in the US. In law school, it's like, okay, go learn these things in law school and then go take a semi-related test and then go do a job that's not really related to those other things. And by the way, you also don't get to sleep for 6 or 7 years. I don't believe, and this is my pet theory, I have not proven it, I don't believe that any industry knows how to hire their own, which is why I tell people to kind of chill out about the hiring process. Now, all right, let's talk. That's my soapbox version. Now let's go down to like tactically. Tactically, big companies, they have to hire a lot. Google has to hire, I think, 14,000 people a year. I saw some back of the envelope math. That means they have to hire lots of people, right? Thousands of people per month, hundreds of people per week. And that means they have a giant funnel and they're just like, come on in. They want to hire you. So there's all kinds of, you're kind of on rails. There are weird, fickle requirements to getting in, but there's a giant machine. Unfortunately, again, it's kind of random in the middle. Small companies, often you can get the job just by having a conversation over coffee or pinging someone, on Y Combinator's job board and talking with the co-founder and investor. You might just like, congratulations, you're in, kid. But then maybe you're not qualified for that, which is totally fine. You'll figure it out, right? So I would say it's probably easier. It's still kind of random. And I've had so much luck. It's in getting jobs is unbelievable. But I'll stop there. That's it. In general, one's a machine and one is people, and the people are always going to be easier than a machine.
One thing I'll add is that it's very good. I think from an applicant's perspective, it's very good when you're being tested on what you will actually work on at the company. And John, you can maybe you can back me up on this. But like for instance, at Showcase, if you're working on the front end at Showcase, then we will actually send you a take-home challenge in React. And then after you complete that work, we will have a technical sit-down or a Zoom call with you to actually understand why you made these decisions, why you made these trade-offs, what was your approach, why did you choose JavaScript, why didn't you use TypeScript? And then from there, we would actually expand on that. Okay, now you have the front-end application. How would you build the back-end, right? How would you design the whole architecture, right? And so we test your knowledge based on what you will actually work on, but we don't actually ask you a specific algorithm question like do some dynamic programming or do a DFS or BFS, right? Because what you will actually work on day to day is actually more important, and that's what we test for. And I'm sure, John, like some companies, they actually do that as well, right? And so that's actually very helpful.
I mean, yes, some companies do this. In fact, when I interviewed at Facebook in 2012, a bunch of the questions were around, a couple of the questions were around, given a subset of the DOM, find this in some other tree. And I was like, this is kind of strange. And then like a few months later, they released React, and I realized that the engineers were working on building React and that virtual DOM system, and they were running into like some tricky stuff, and they were just asking that as an interview question. Is it a fair question? Sure, maybe, but I mean, I certainly couldn't have studied for it. But if someone like, it's random. Again, there's a random problem they've run up, and it's actually kind of the sticky part of the stuff that they're working on. And they take that and they ask that as an interview question, and they judge the interviewee with their own internal rubric. I mean, nobody knows. Nobody even at the company knows what constitutes a pass or fail. So I mean, I like the way at Showcase we evaluate people because we watch them work through stuff. But sometimes when companies take the actual stuff they're working on and they set it in front of a person, that kind of doesn't feel 100% fair.
John,
and
what
like,
do you, sorry,
go ahead. No.
No, I was going to say, what do you also think about, you know, a lot of people when they want to get the next job, what they do is they just sit down and they don't do anything else but solve lead code questions because they were told that they need to solve lead code questions, and they do like 600 questions or 1,000 questions. Whereas that time could actually be used, you know, building products, building applications, learning about system design, learning tools like front-end tools, back-end tools, Node.js. And that is actually more productive of their time because now they are more holistic in their skill set, right? Versus
I'd like to
being a lead coach champion, right?
I'd like to add on to that question. It's a question as well. Like, not just that. Here, what I have seen, what folks do is just for their 4 years of engineering, all they do is like lead code stuff and the computer programming part, like on code forces and stuff. Because there's this misguidance being spreading that like computer programming is the only way to get a good job. Can you believe that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, people are saying that it is the only way to get a good job at FAANG companies or other companies or whatever. And I have gotten like opportunities at like Google and all these other big tech companies without CP. So obviously data structures algorithms are crucial, very important, because they are asked in many interviews. But I think lead code is more than enough. If you want to clear your interviews, it's like if you're just doing computer programming, it's like bringing a rocket launcher to a knife fight, right? But what are your thoughts on that, John? I mean, like, you can do lead code, but you can also spend some time in like development.
Yeah, I mean, I everybody's doing lead code. It's a shame. Lead code is a fantastic platform, and I do think it's a good curriculum for learning data structures and problems that take about an hour to solve, which in my career I've only had once or twice. It's a fantastic curriculum, and I don't want to disparage lead code. And I don't believe that it's fantastic as a method of figuring out if someone's good enough to work at a company. But like, let's take a step back from this for a second. And I want your audience to ask themselves, like, what are they trying to do? Are they just trying to get a job? And that's fine. Get a job writing code, that's fine. Lead code may get them there, maybe not. Or are you trying to build a career, right? Are you trying to like put a dent in the world? Lead code is not going to be enough, because it's crazy that people spend so much time doing lead code when, as soon as you get inside the job, especially at a larger company, the job is not writing code. I don't spend a ton of time writing code. Of course, I've been doing this so long, I'm at a very high level. It's painful these days when I have a PR out. It takes a lot out of me. I'm not writing code at work as much as I used to. And you may spend time each day coding, but most of your work is going to be coordinating with other people. It's going to be taking an idea, presenting it, getting buy-in. Okay, our team agrees. Now we have to go to this other team and get their agreement because we're plugging into their stuff. And now it's a larger group, and you're communicating. So you're going to be listening, you're going to be speaking, you're going to be making consensus, you're going to be documenting, you're going to be drawing pictures to communicate architectures, you're going to be doing some research to figure out Well, how much faster will we be if we're a microservice rather than a monolith? And then maybe you're going to be in the elevator with the CEO and you've got like 5 seconds to tell him what you work on and why it's important. That means you have to have communication skills. You have to have the skill of summary, the skill of storytelling, the skill of building consensus. Leak code teaches you none of that stuff. And in fact, I have a lot of students who are very good at leak code and very good coders, and they get inside the room and they cannot communicate. And so them getting a job is a coin flip. Maybe yes, maybe no. Because one of the things that the interviewer is doing in the room is they're thinking, what would it be like to work with this person? Could I give this person a complicated problem and then just walk away and know that it would get done? And if all you are is a leak code monkey, then you're not fully autonomous. You're like you yourself are like a machine that only takes programs and runs them, right?
It's like the difference between a programmer and an engineer, right? I think that's
those words mean the same thing to me. So like, yes, someone who's a programmer who's just writing programs, I don't know that job exists anymore per se. Software engineering is coder, programmer, software engineer to me mean the same exact thing. And that's in the Silicon Valley, that's kind of how it's used. But in a way, you're absolutely right. Like, if you want to write programs, that's not as valuable to a company as, can you describe in one sentence the entire problem with this approach? That's far more valuable, and that's how I've had some success in my career.
Yeah, and I believe like there's no workaround for it. Like, companies are gonna ask lead code questions, so students have to, right? They don't want to miss out. So better be safe than sorry, but that does not mean you are only going to do lead code.
Yeah,
do it
100% agree.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me just add on there. You're 100% right. It's unfortunate, but like the default is lead code. So you should definitely do lead code. You should probably do the blind lead code 75, and then maybe like 100 more questions. You should be able to do mediums fairly easily, and you should be able to tackle a couple of hards. Not every company asks leak code questions. In fact, some companies are realizing that just because someone can solve a toy problem doesn't mean that they can actually do a real world problem and generate code that's readable to other human beings, because that's another part of the communication. The hardest thing in the world is reading someone else's code and understanding it. Writing code is easy. I can generate code all the time, and I look away and look back. Who the hell wrote this? Oh, it was me just now. Right? But again, the person in the room is going to be judging you. Could I work with this person? And they're going to look at the code you generate and try to extrapolate, like, oh, okay, they pick good variable names, they pick good function names, they break up their code. There's not a lot of long stuff. There's no switch statements. There are no else statements. They short circuit, like all kinds of different rubrics they use. Leak code doesn't necessarily teach you all that. Yeah. But there's another element to coding and creating stuff, which Rong and you can all too also mention. Are you doing assignments, or are you building something of your own volition? And I think there's something entrepreneurial and special about making something. So if we look at your resume and you just have classwork on your resume, that's fine. But that's not as interesting as, I built a thing. Why did you build the thing? Because I really wanted to see if I could do it. You're 30% already have the job just from those two things. So it's like, oh, this person is a self-starter. This person is going to run around and do things on their own. This person is going to teach themselves. They're going to build. They're going to figure stuff out. That's what we really want to learn. We want to see. And so a little bit of leak code, a little bit of building something on your own, and then working on those interpersonal skills. And there's no one on earth that can stop you.
Could not agree more. You just summarized my last 3 years of college.
Sweet. I'm going to take over your channel now. That's how it works, right?
Cool. All right. Let's talk about like last few key points, then we'll wrap up. Remote work. So how has that affected the talent marketplace for developers?
This is a big one.
Wrong,
Uh,
you have been also like working remotely, right? Maybe we can hear your thoughts on it. And your entire team is remote. You have never met like
Exactly.
like in the previous.
The
Yeah, go
only,
ahead.
the only guy that I've met in my team, am I here? Hello? Yeah. The only guy I've met in my team is John. And I like face to face. The rest of my team is completely remote. I've never actually met them, but we work super efficiently, just throwing a bunch of things like Jira, Zoom, Discord, Notion together, and we're just operating that way, and we've been operating that way since we ever started. Just because of COVID, by almost no choice, but it's worked out really well for us. And also thanks to the guys at 37 Signals and Basecamp, because they've really championed this idea of remote work for a long time, and we've really learned from them. Now, how will that affect the talent marketplace? To me, it opens up the competition level to be everywhere in the world, which is good and bad. So it's good because as a company, now you can hire good talent that is not within a 30 or 300 mile, 30-mile radius, right? Which is, it's not all concentrated in one place, right? That's great because if you are a great engineer, you can you can base yourself anywhere in the world and earn in wherever the company is hiring you out of, and you can live that life. But at the same time, you can work on great problems, tackle interesting challenges. Now, that however does mean that when you now you're not within that radius, now you're competing across the whole world, right? Whether it's Eastern Europe, whether it's the UK, whether it's Brazil, India, Indonesia, it doesn't matter, right? Great talent is everywhere, and so now you're competing with the whole world for this time. So that does change the dynamic a little bit, but I think overall it's actually beneficial for the entire industry, right? To be able to find developers for us, for example, Estonia, India,
Hmm.
Vietnam, who are incredible at what they do, but then now we don't need to hire people and put everybody in the same building, right? Everybody can be efficient from anywhere.
Yeah, yep.
John, you
Totally
want to
agree
get a
with
go?
that.
go ahead, Kunal.
No, I was just saying like I've been working remotely as well, and even in the future I'll be working remotely. Um, so I work at CO right now, completely remote, and I'm loving it. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
I have children, and I did not love working remotely. I've spent a long time working remotely, but when the children are young, boy, getting personal space is hard. I enjoy having the office, but I think we're going to enter, at least in the valley here, I think we're going to enter a nice balance between working from home and going into the office. Those, when I first started my career at Apple, I had my own office as like a straight out of school kid, and which is unheard of these days. And now everything is these open plan offices, which are just like a great way to get the flu every year. And they're loud, and it's really distracting. So I think it's going to be a nice balance. Not every company can hire people all over the world, but I am very happy that people in remote places or remote from Seattle and the Bay Area are getting the same opportunities, because there's a lot of talent overseas for me.
Cool. Thanks a lot for sharing, John and Rong. And since we're talking about developers, what are some of the key trends that you are excited about going forward? You're on mute. Like if you want
I
to
was telling
tell
Alec,
someone like, this is the tech you can jump on right now. It's going to be like create a lot of opportunities in the future or whatever.
okay, so what trends am I excited for in software development? Well, there's one that I'm very not excited for, and I think Wrong knows exactly what I'm going to talk about.
Metaverse.
Oh, okay. Sorry, there are two that are I'm very not excited about. Here, if I can just say kind of a bad word for a second, I think when you're looking at technologies and what's going to be a forever thing and what's going to be a fad, you have to develop kind of a good bullshit detector, right? And a good bullshit detector is when someone's telling you something and they can't really define what it is, probably bullshit. Now, anytime someone mentions the metaverse, ask them exactly what they mean. And then anytime, and this is now going into the number 2 thing that I'm not excited about, anytime someone says NFTs are going to change everything with the metaverse and Web3 and DeFi, ask them exactly what that means. Because as an architect of large systems, even distributed systems, like I know a thing or two about performance and developing applications. I know a thing or two about portability. So the idea that you'll have an NFT which represents a gun that you purchased in one game and it's going to magically show up in all other games, probably that's not going to happen. My bullshit detector goes off every time someone mentions that stuff. I'll probably be excoriated online for that. But those are 2 technologies I'm not excited about. The ones that I am excited about, this is actually, I was not prepared for this. I'm still bullish on JavaScript, and actually now I'm more bullish on TypeScript. The fact that anyone can build anything that they think of is still pretty powerful. Although now I feel like the pendulum is swinging towards the no code and the low code movement. So I think if you learn how to build those systems or even leverage those systems, you're going to get a lot of opportunities your way. Of course, the machine learning trends, like 5, 6, 7 years ago, data science and machine learning were like the big hotness and the jobs were huge. I feel like that's cooling off, but now it's kind of commoditized. So that knowledge is going to be super ubiquitous. And so like anytime you have a lot of data coming in, learning how to wrangle that data and set it up so that a model can be trained on it and then the model put into production. If you know any of those things, you're going to be super valuable. Data flow, Beam, Spark, Flink, you're going to be just, and then Kubernetes or any of the Google hosted or Amazon hosted or Microsoft hosted or now Oracle hosted versions of those things are going to make you super valuable. Because I think Mr. Beast's video of Squid Game, which was released, was watched 100 million times in like a few
Yeah.
days, which was something like 4,000 years of video. How much data did that generate? All of that data, all the views and scrubbing and pause and play, all that data gets emitted and gets sent back to YouTube, and it gets put in a big pile so they can chew on it and their models can learn like, oh, what thumbnail should we show so that they click on this? How should we structure videos to maximize viewing? If you can handle big data, especially that plugs into data science, you're going to be super valuable. And then of course, mobile is everything, even still today. And so those low code and no code systems are going to be great for building prototypes, but when you're going to build the real thing, you're going to need someone who knows what they're doing. And so even like every company I've worked for since 2007 had a web team and a mobile team. Sometimes they're mixed together. But the web team has only gotten smaller over time, and the mobile teams, if the company's doing it right, is growing bigger. So learning at least one of those stacks would also be super valuable, iOS or Android.
John,
That's top of mind for me. Go ahead, Ron.
I was going to jump in here and say that I think for the listeners or for now's audience, I think the most important thing is focus on solving the problem at hand, and then think about the technology to use to solve that problem. Right? Don't jump on a hype. Don't jump on a trend just because somebody's telling a really good story about it. Now, if you have a problem to solve and that solution, for example, like what the folks at Next.js, what they're doing is amazing. And so when you use a technology, just make sure it solves the problem at hand, right? Or what do you want to do, right? I think you will never go wrong if you can really get a solution to a problem.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for sharing, John and Rong. Just one last question I have is about Showcase. Like, what is like in the product roadmap for Showcase? Like, how will you be helping more developers in the coming few years? Since you mentioned it's only 18 months old.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. So take a step back. What's Showcase for, right? Showcase is built for developers, but we do three main things at Showcase. The first thing we do is all about developer representation, right? How do we showcase who you are as a developer, which means who you've worked with, your tech stack, your projects, your blogs, your positions, and so on and so forth, right? So we want to really nail that because we think that's the most important in today's world. When you want to evaluate who a developer is, like we just talked about, you want a holistic view of who they are, and a great developer portfolio or profile can do that. Now, we just launched custom domains, so every developer can come on, set up their custom domains on Showcase. Now, what more we're going to do soon is we're going to have a really, really cool Showcase Pro version for these developer profiles, which lets you customize the way you want it to look, as well as an additional amount of features that we won't announce yet, but you'll see it coming. Now, the second thing we do is all about the community, right? Developers need community because that's the way we learn, that's the way we grow, that's the way we share ideas. So we're going to introduce more to the community in terms of community analytics. So if you wanted to run your own community, you could do that on Showcase. If you wanted to create a private community within just you and your top fans for now, you could do that on Showcase. So that's from the community aspect, and that's what we're going to do. And now the final aspect that is really important to developers everywhere, and it's not going to change over the next 20 years, is the opportunity piece, right? Every developer needs to find work, right? No matter where you are in the world, whichever technology you're using, and that's not going to change. So we're going to introduce full-time jobs, access to full-time jobs, access to gigs if you want to, if that's your thing, whether you want to work on part-time stuff. And the third thing that we're going to introduce is teams on Showcase, which means you as a developer and you and your friend. So let's say Kunal, you're a front-end guy, I'm a DevOps guy, John might be a back-end guy. We could work together as a team, and we could create a Showcase team, and then we can outsource ourselves as a team to employers that want to hire us, right? So it's called augmentation teams. We can join the team 6 months, 9 months. We can work on that project, and then we can move out. So all these things are coming to Showcase over the next 6 months.
Awesome. Super looking forward to it. And for everyone else, make sure you check out the links in the description. You can use the invite code join Kunal and get started. Cool. Thanks, John and Rong, for joining. It was amazing, and I learned a lot. And yeah, really appreciate you giving the time. For everyone else, if you want to connect with them, you can check out the links in the description and join Showcase. You can find them on Showcase, and yeah, explore the platform. Any closing remarks, John or Rong?
Thanks so much for having us. It was a delight and a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks for coming on. Kunal, thanks for having us. And to the audience, I guess, keep learning, keep pushing.
Yep, keep learning. All right. See you in the next one.